Hey there, this is Dean Walker, and I'm the founder of a little organization and online presence called livingresilience.net, and our offerings in terms of programs for the collapse aware community that we call Deep Academy. And this particular recording is for two different audiences, one for the podcast, which we also run called the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And I'm hoping that if you're one of the folks that is watching because this is part of the podcast routine, that you'll stick around and hopefully find out a little bit about our most current offering, an introductory series to the whole collapse aware conversation and to the collapse aware community at large. And I just hope you find it useful and interesting to find out what we're up to. This is a very different thing than anything we've put out yet. It's much lighter content, less content dense, I would say. Uh, Goes by pretty quickly. This has been 5 consecutive Saturdays in June and July of 2021. And this is the last between session uh, video or communique, and that we're going to be putting out before we hit the last Saturday. And the theme of this last Saturday is about reconnection with soul. So I'm going to be finishing up this particular uh, video and episode with a bit of, I think, some of the wisest writing about soul that is available today from a remarkable guy named Bill Plotkin. And he and his team at Animas Valley Institute have been working with people in what they call soul initiation work for decades. It's quite remarkable, and he's got a number of books that he's written about that. And the pieces of his work are instrumental in developing the reconnection to soul as a part of this work. And so we're going to work backwards from there. We'll get there at the end of this video. But what I want to start with is just a little recap of what this 5 week series has been about, some of the major thresholds that we've crossed together. In 5 weeks, in these brief sessions in these 5 weeks, there's really no way to go in depth into any particular part of of this body of work. Um, there's a lot, and it's the most extraordinary conversation in human history. So yeah, there's a lot. Um, so what we were able to do is just touch in with some of the larger issues that are seem built in when we're looking at the human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. Let, let me just start out with a little recap of what have we been talking about during the 5 sessions. Started out in the last weekend of June of this year, and that on that Saturday in the first session, we talked about basically the location, finding the location of where we find our truth in the human experience, and especially in these times in which fake news and alternative facts and there's just a whirlwind of insanity. Trying to make sense in this world is virtually impossible, and it really takes a concerted effort to find one's grounding, a center, if you will, in the mental faculties. How we communicate with one another, how we think, how we sense make in these times. It is not intuitive, and there's a full weaponized assault on our attention and our ability to make sense of elements of these times. So this was the main focus of that first piece. And this is probably a good place to remind us all kind of what are some of the core elements that this body of work is built on. And really, it starts with the same steps that I went through to eventually write my book, The Impossible Conversation, which I put out in 2017. And started out a few years before that, where I really took it on to vet, to confirm the abrupt climate change information, not just climate change, but abrupt climate change happening much faster and much more intensely than we hear about in the regular news. And I did, in fact, vet that material. And I immediately knew, wow, I want to write a book about this process, learning how to learn about this, and then a number of the other predicaments that we've gotten ourselves into in these times. And so I kept, this was going to be my first book, and I had to keep it simple because I'm not a professional writer. This is a complex topic to take on. And so I kept asking myself the simplest questions I could to, to keep it at a level of complexity that I could somehow hold single-handedly. So the first question was, what is actually going on? And again, out of vetting the material for first abrupt climate change and then a number of other existential level predicaments that humanity has created for itself, I saw that what we are in is actually a predicament, a human caused predicament. So the second simple question was, what got us here? And no matter how often I was asking the question and what sources I was looking at, the answer kept coming back that we've disconnected. And what that eventually evolved into is we've disconnected from all the primary sources of meaning and relationship in human life. So if we are in the longer version of this body of work, if you were coming in and into the Living Resilience .net website and you were coming on to the Deep Academy body of work, all the programs that we've got available, they'd be longer. They'd be longer than the 5 weeks, and they'd be slowed down, and they'd be able to do a deep dive into many of these topics. And so that would be one of them, is to be able to lay out for you the thinking that got me to basically sum it up as saying what got us here into these predicaments is our collective disconnection from all the primary sources of meaning and relationship in human life. And so then the question became, what does that mean? What has that cost us? Has that cost us getting to this threshold of what we now casually call the sixth mass extinction, which is a human caused event. So that's a good portion of those full length introductions to this work. In this 5 week session, we had a week to basically start to take on the exploration of what if this is so? What if this is what got us here? And I've got to say, it's just been a real privilege to work with the people who signed up and participated in this work. They were really willing to jump right in because another piece that was critical to this whole body of work, and especially to this 5 week series, is we've really come to the conclusion that this is not about uh, volume of content, like the right amount of information, and especially the right amount of that information is going to convince, or it's going to verify, or it's going to validate some particular point of view. And it's very obvious that the world we're in is actually holds facts in more in contempt, and facts are often used and twisted to fit whatever the tribal point of view is in this polarized world that we happen to have. So that very little in this particular coursework is about a huge number of videos and articles about doom scrolling, about how screwed we are in the world, and so on. It's far more an experiential noticing the reactions that happen in our own systems, in our own psychology, in our own thinking, in our own body, physical reactions, energetic reactions, and so on. So that gives you a little bit of a clue about what folks were grappling with and what the meetings were about in between the Saturday sessions. There was really an opportunity to be actively in conversation with people and in process with each other, noticing our reactions to these various pieces of both information and evocative exposure to particular videos, heck, even some poetry and music and so on, things that would tend to evoke a more visceral sense, a felt sense of how we're reacting individually and together to this stuff. The second week was more of a focus on reconnection with others. And what we did was find a couple of remarkable communicators and people who put themselves into extraordinary, challenging situations in order to do their work. One of them was a filmmaker named Dia Khan, and another one was George Markle, who's a remarkable science communicator and wrote the book Don't Even Think About It. And both of them were plenty of evocative experience for us to be able to have some very deep conversations about what are we each individually confronting in ourselves, to be able to have difficult conversations with people who are not exactly like us. That might be in our own families or our own neighborhoods. It could be in our workplace. And for sure, it's in the difference between different tribes or groups, if you will, polarized groups, particularly in the privileged countries like the USA. Um, so that was the second week. The third week was exploration of both grief and shadow. And again, we had some evocative elements that we could all, basically view and take in and react to. And then notice, at least at a superficial level, what is my relationship with grief? What is my relationship with shadow? How much understanding do I have of how what role does grief play in my life? And what role does a relationship with shadow, individual and collective shadow, play in my life? Um, so this is one of the more difficult weeks in the series for me, because both of these could be months, if not years, of deep work for an individual to come to terms with, to explore in a good way. And it also calls for a very high level of functionality in a circle when people come together and exploring and expressing grief, exploring and expressing and hopefully integrating shadow. These are um, these are things to be taken on only by groups with a very sincere uh, commitment to being for one another, being willing to hold space for one another in a knowledgeable way, in a skillful way. And of course, we had 1 week to be able to have that show up. The what was clear was that many of the people in this course this time around, this beta test, if you will, came in with some real skill sets. So there was some real depth expressed as people recounted how they're in between. They called them the pod meetings in between the Saturdays. And then we got to the fourth week, which is practices of reconnection. And that's basically what we call the, the kind of the backbone of this work, is that if we all are kind of working with the assumption that what got us here is our disconnection from deeper self, from other people, from earth, and from soul, then uh, each of us would want to gather the kinds of practices that would help us reconnect with each of those elements. And those will be different for each of us. Yours would be different than mine and be different than the third person in the circle, and so on. But what we can do, even though our practices are different and our what matters most to us individually is different, we can come together in circle and hold space for one another. And more importantly, going back to the last week I was just describing, we can help each other to see what's what I yeah I can ask people to help me see what I can't see on my own. By definition, there are certain elements of shadow and actually certain elements of grief as well that are very, very difficult, if not impossible, to see on our own. So that's been one piece of what we explored together, is those dynamics of gathering our own practices and sharing about those practices, and then starting to really look at what are the skills needed to sit in circle with one another to support each other in that kind of deep looking and that deep work that is, again, the backbone of this whole body of work on Living Resilience Deep Academy. So after the practices of reconnection, well, actually, I'd like to mention one last thing before going on. Within these practices, it's been one of our main emphases this week and in this whole series is to every week include an embodied practice session to be coupled right up with the classroom session that we do. And three of the five sessions were a particular kind of guided meditation called Wider Embraces. And Wider Embraces, I have to say that this is going to give you just a little snapshot of one piece of this work. So I hope it's not too fast and too light a touch to be able to make sense of it. One of the elements that we include consistently as we lay out what practices are available on the menu, and everybody contributes to the menu. We be sure to include elements that sometimes they don't fit in the mental body or the mental world that we all have. They don't quite fit in the physical world that we have, or physical body. And they don't even fit in necessarily the emotional or feeling body that we all have. And we call it the energy body. And there are immense distinctions and experiences available in that energy body. And in fact, that I would say that I'm kind of unusual that way. This is my primary way of perceiving the world, of kind of scanning the world to see what's going on and what's safe and what's not, what are the dynamics going on, rather than the psychological or even the emotional, which I do scan for. But my first layer of scanning for what's going on in a situation is in the energetic world or the energy body. And I'm very, very excited to say how immensely successful it's been to include in three of the five embodiment sessions. We included this practice of wider embraces uh, as the embodied practice in those three sessions. It's quite a commitment, and really it reflects how much we honor, and I honor the power of a woman named Stina Durrell has created this remarkable practice. And I think it's one of the fastest, most gentle immersion into an experience that people can have of the energy body. And some of these things took me months and even years in other trainings and other mentoring situations. It took me a lot longer to uh, to get good at the experiencing these things. So just wanted to include that for those who have an embodiment kind of orientation in their approach to this kind of work in these remarkable times. This has been a good section of our work is the embodiment side and the energetic side. This last section is about soul, and we're going to be talking about that just a little bit at the end of this video. And I got a number of exemplars, people who just sharing what their practices have been and how they stay connected to their sense of center in this whirlwind world that we're living in. You see insanity in this world. Um, Perhaps the last foundation piece of this work is to explore, if you will, the soul body, sometimes called the archetypal body. And this is where the mythopoetic realm it just resonates. So for those who follow Michael Meade or um, uh, Andrew Harvey and a number of different psychospiritual practitioners and guides and mentors, this is where that kind of work starts to chime in. And my particular focus and favorite mentor, most dear mentor, there are two of them actually for me in this area. One is also a grief mentor named Francis Weller, and the other one is a facilitator and author of books and content and a whole organization that is committed to offering soul initiations to people. And that happens out in the wilderness. An extraordinary program, extraordinary books, and the whole team, including the guy who runs the thing, is Bill Plotkin. So you'll be hearing a little bit more from Bill Plotkin at the end of this conversation right here, the one that I'm offering to you, just as a taste of where we're going to be going in this last session about soul. So what got us here is we've disconnected. And here is not only mountains of problems and challenges that are all human caused, but also really at the core of it is the predicaments that we're in. And what can we do to be able to be functional in the face of all that? Because predicaments offer us no solutions. And that's part of a unique aspect of this body of work is this body of work is really designed to be of service in the best way we can to the collapse aware community. So, likely that you're here watching this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That there is a very, very important threshold that one crosses at some point or another to realize that we are uh, in, actually, we're in the midst of human caused collapse of earth and human systems to some degree all around the earth. I mean, it's obvious just by looking at the news, the headlines on a daily basis, and it's been going that way for quite some time now. And my personal take on it is that we're just barely beginning in that process. That the uh, larger and larger expressions of human caused collapse of Earth and human systems, it's going to be increasing. And there's just no doubt in my mind. What's possibly a relief in that, though, is this work is not based on you believing like I do. That's just my take. And there are plenty of people who are involved in this work who have a very different timeline very different sense of urgency about what's going on. And they don't have the same sense of collapse going on now or same interpretation of the headlines. That's completely fine. What matters most is that we are able to come together and bring our practices to share with one another and to support one another in those practices of being more and more present in the face of larger and larger stressors. I guess if there's one quick and easy way of saying the purpose of this work is that I do not put ever into the purpose statement of this work that we're going to be finding the Green New Deal or those solutions to all the problems. There might be some solutions to some problems, and there might be some solutions to challenges that we're facing, and that's fine. And there may well be, in fact, often are, many people who go through this work and take on these practices of reconnection, and they find themselves uh, very much more motivated to be activists in their life, boldly so. For some people, that's what they step into, and more power to them. Absolutely. But that is not necessarily at the center. That is not the purpose of this work, is to create activists or to prod people into action. That's, I think, almost offensive for someone who gets themselves into the depth of this work to find our core purpose is an extraordinary process. This soul initiation that I mentioned that Bill Plotkin is is fond of, creating whole initiatory rites to bring people to presence for that sense of purpose. That's not something to be then forced into some sort of a track to then be activists or to solve problems. It's far more existential, and each person really needs to come up with that for themselves. That's as core a choice as I know that a human being can make for themselves. So that actually is a good segue to what I'd like to share with you a bit from Bill Plotkin. There are a few quotes from one of his books that I'd like to just read them for you and shift the screen a little bit, shift the energy a little bit. This is remarkably challenging work. This work of grappling with human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems and our disconnection from the primary sources of meaning and relationship in a human life. Um, it's an extraordinary journey to try and reclaim that center, to reclaim that relationship, that connection with deeper self, with each other, with earth, and with soul. So I'd like to give you a few words from Bill Plotkin as he describes what is soul and how does it fit in a life. How does he uh, hold it, frame it, describe it as an essential part of finding what matters most to us in life. So, a few words from Bill Plotkin from his most recent book, The Journey of Soul Initiation. Foundationally, soul for me is an ecological concept, not a psychological one, nor a spiritual or religious one. Specifically, by soul, I mean a person or thing's unique ecological niche in the Earth community. By this definition, all creatures have souls, not just humans, and not just creatures, but every naturally occurring thing, every flower and stone, every river, mountain, forest, every cloud, storm, rainbow, every season, every species, even every human language, community, and culture, which is to say, all human creations that evolve organically, those that we don't fabricate solely with our strategic minds. Each natural thing, in other words, has its own unique position or role in the larger web of earthly life. A niche, in essence, consists of a thing's unique set of relationships with every other thing in its ecosystem. A thing's eco niche, its soul, is what makes it what it is on the deepest, widest, and most natural level of identity. This foundational relationship between eco niche and identity is why I believe unique eco niche is the best definition for soul. Notice too that this definition is completely resonant with how we commonly use the word soul in everyday speech. We're most offering we're most often referring to the deepest meaning, significance, distinctiveness, place, or purpose of a thing, its original essence, independent of how we might interpret it. This is implied, for example, in phrases like his soul work or she searched her soul, and even she is the soul of discretion. Soul has always implied that which is most true and real. What could be more true or real than a thing's unique place in creation? When it comes to our own species, the individual human soul is, by this definition, the particular ecological niche a person is born to occupy, whether or not that niche is ever consciously discovered or embodied. This caveat must be added because we humans might be the only creature capable of never discovering the individual niche we were born for, or refusing it if we do. This has consequences. To reduce the chance of being misunderstood, I'll be even more explicit because the following point is the hardest for most people to grasp. By human soul, I mean a person's unique place, not in human culture, but in the greater Earth community, the more than human world. The human soul, when understood as unique eco niche, is an identity much deeper than our personality, social vocational role, or political or religious affiliations. Although we express ourselves through human culture by way of our social roles, our soul is of and belongs to the larger, natural, not only human world. Each human soul is first and foremost an element of the soul of the world, the anima mundi. We, like individuals of all species, are creatures that emerge from and are shaped by Earth and by our relationships with all her other inhabitants and environments. This concept of eco niche returns the idea of soul at long last to its original home and context, the greater web of life. This is the only definition of soul I know that can support culturally exiled humans to return to Earth. Bill Plotkin from his most recent book. So it's been a pleasure. For those of you who are watching who've been a part of this 5-week series, Dancing at the Edge, thank you. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your robust participation, your sincere participation, and reaching out to connect with one another. And for those of you who are watching in the Poetry of Predicament and you're just hearing about this, and thank you for watching, I appreciate it. If you've been, if your interest has been piqued at all, there'll be some information about how to contact us and contact information about all of our courses down in the show notes of this particular video. Be more than happy to talk with anybody about what is this work about, and what sort of topics we explore, and so on, in far more detail than I can put into this video here. So again, thank you all for watching, and thanks for being a part of the Collapse Aware community. This, as I mentioned before, I see as the most extraordinary time in human history. And this is perhaps the most difficult conversation that humanity, particularly humanity at large, around the world, have had to grapple with at the same time. So let's keep doing this exploration together. What I can say in my own experience is that while this is the most easily the most challenging work I've ever taken on, it is also the most deep and rich and rewarding experience in my life of being able to engage with sincere, kindred spirits in this very difficult work. There's also just such a sweetness, such a deep bonding that can happen. Um, how we can share with each other, how to keep our hearts open, and how to stay connected while we're dealing with some of the most difficult inner work and conversations that certainly I've ever had to. So hope you'll consider coming to join us in some of this work and exploration, and whatever your path is as a part of this loosely knit small community around the planet of the Collapse Aware folks. I wish you well, whatever your path is. It's a it's a rich one. It's a challenging one, and I wish you well. Thanks.